Dear audience, hello and welcome to our webinar, Risk and Compliance, New Global Trends in AML, CFT, CPF Areas in 2021. Before we start, please access the webinar resources and materials, and going to the navigation part, the second slide, we highly recommend you to use this tool set on the bottom of your screen, which provide very useful stuff, in fact, like speaker biographies, webinar materials, technical support, as well as a Q&A box. We will have a separate Q&A session at the final part of the webinar. So, yeah, to kick off, my name is Tair Baygunov. I'm the new business sales manager at Refinitiv in Kazakhstan. So the Refinitiv actually, as you may know, is a global provider of financial market data and insights. It was the former finance and risk business of Thomson Reuters. Before 2018, we separated when we separated as a definite entity, and since February of the current year, we belong to the London Stock Exchange Group. So just to briefly explain you the idea of this webinar, of the main topic which we came to with our colleagues, it's due to the higher growing importance of the compliance procedures and the policies needed to grow the business globally all around the world. So, yeah, as you probably know, the compliance questions and issues are actually pretty significant ones in business operations nowadays. Yeah, before I pass the word to our next speaker, just two slides forward. As you can see, we have 5 speakers, moderators, representatives of various companies today. I would like to say special thanks and gratitude to our general partner, the team of Astana Financial Services Authority, with tremendous efforts of whom this event became live for you today. So now I'm going to pass the word to the Director of Financial Conduct Division of AFSA, Mr. Yurkegali Yedimbayev. Yurkegali, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good day, dear colleagues. As you might know, the Astana International Financial Center, it's a financial hub which brings together the best financial practices and opportunities which are offered by the similar financial centers like London, Dubai, Hong Kong, and Singapore. In the system of Astana International Financial Center, Astana Financial Services Authority, the body I represent, it's integrated financial and ancillary services regulator of Astana International Financial Center. And one of Astana International Financial Center key regulatory priorities is combating money laundering and terrorist financing. As to give you a brief idea, as of today, after AFSA already developed its AML CFT supervisory framework in line with FATF recommendations. For example, in 2020, AFSA initiated amendments to the Kazakhstan AML law, which allowed us even to enhance AML CFT regime in the AFSA. AFSA also established close cooperation with Financial Intelligence Unit of the Republic of Kazakhstan. In this sphere, talking about the recent trends, I should mention that the main test for AFSA AML CFT regime will be in 2022, when the Republic of Kazakhstan will be subject to a mutual evaluation by the Eurasian Group on combating money laundering and financing of terrorism. As for the AML CFT supervision itself, we might say to the moment that we are using all the supervisory powers in our practice. But unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 situation for the last year and the beginning of this year, our capability to conduct on-site supervision or on-site inspections was pretty limited. Apart from that, we are already developed the AML annual returns. We are providing off-site thematic reviews on the AML issues, and we are already started to conduct several investigations in it. Yeah. So that's mainly it, and my colleague Dulat Akasov later on will show you the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Erkigali. Now we're going to pass the word to Mr. Dulat Akasov, Senior Associate Financial Conduct Division of Astana Financial Services Authority, to the regulation policies of the AFSA. Dulat, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dulat Akasov. I am a Senior Associate at the Financial Conduct Division and responsible for the AML CFT functions. Let me introduce my short presentation related to AML CFT regulation in the AFSA. Astana International Financial Center is the first English common law jurisdiction on Commonwealth independent states and post-Soviet space territory. A legal and regulatory regime developed in line with the international standards and global regulatory developments recommended by IOSCO, Basel Committee, OECD, and FATF, and others. AFC legal regime aimed at creating a business impartial and fair environment. Finally, FATF recommendations are integrated into the AFC AML CFT regime. AFSA has AFC AML rules which adopted in line with the requirements of FATF recommendations. As it was mentioned before, the important event is upcoming. It is the EAG mutual evaluation of Kazakhstan in 2022, including IFC jurisdiction. The Republic of Kazakhstan will be subject to EAG mutual evaluation, and as a part of this mutual evaluation, EAG expert assessors will focus on whether the IFC jurisdiction has implemented the FATF recommendations and how successful it is in maintaining a strong AML CFT system. For example, in first part of mutual evaluation, technical compliance, it will include the assessment of AML CFT legal framework of AFC. And in effectiveness part, it will be evaluation of how, for example, AFSA implemented and performed these requirements of the recommendations. The next stage is EAG expert assessors will conduct interviews with AFSA representatives and the relevant IFC participants, subject to AML CFT supervision. The next one is AFSA's preparatory work for this assessment commenced in 2020 and will continue through 2021 and 2022, in conjunction and coordination with the other relevant competent authorities in the Republic of Kazakhstan and involvement of the relevant IFC participants. For example, AFSA will send questionnaires to the relevant AFC participants for gathering statistical and technical compliance information. And also we will organize webinars for the relevant AFC participants and explain AML CFT framework and mutual evaluation. For example, interviews will focus on the questions how, for example, the relevant AFC participants implement and perform the requirements of AML CFT framework in AFC. The next one is interviews can be noted as the questions like how, for example, money laundering reporting officer or the relevant person perform his or her functions. And in case of AML CFT, of course, relevant persons should demonstrate evidence of compliance with the requirements and provide all available information, for example, for questionnaires and for the interviews. As today, AFSA supervises the following AFC participants in the field of AML CFT. It is 24 authorized firms that have regulated activities, 2 authorized market institutions that have market activities, then 21 fintech lab participants who have regulated and or market activities. 1 non-licensed registered DNFPP, it is a real estate developer, and 57 ancillary service providers, which provide different ancillary services and fall under the definition of DNFPPs. The next one is legal acts and documents adopted by the AFSA in the field of AML CFT. The first, it is AFC AML rules. As I mentioned before, AFSA adopted the AML rules in line with the requirements of FATF recommendations. The next one is Aml Guidance. As you know, AFSA adopted this Aml Guidance on May 2020. And in December 30, 2020, AFSA adopted amendments to this AML Guidance in compliance with the amendments to the AML CFT law of Kazakhstan, which came into force on November 15, 2020. As you know, these amendments were signed by the President of Kazakhstan in May 2020. AML Guidance covers most FATF recommendations requirements, including customer due diligence, transparency, beneficial ownership, identification of politically exposed persons, regulation and supervision of financial institutions and DNFPPs, sanction screening, reporting to FIU of suspicious transaction reports, threshold transaction reports, and risk assessment. The next one, it's a guidance on non-face-to-face CDD. On the next slide, I will provide more details because it is a new document approved by the AFSA on December 30, 2020. This guidance on non-face-to-face was adopted in compliance with the requirements of AML CFT law of Kazakhstan and recommendation 10 FATF. In accordance with interpretive note to recommendation 10, the potential high-risk factor for product, service, transaction or delivery channel is non-face-to-face business relationships and transactions. Therefore, AFSA decided to adopt additional preventive measures to manage and mitigate risks related to the non-face-to-face CDD. We believe that it can help to relevant persons avoid the money laundering and terrorist financing risks in non-face-to-face CDD. The requirements on customer due diligence set out in AML rules and AML guidance are also implemented into the guidance on non-face-to-face CDD. The next one is a list of financial and ancillary services subject to the financial monitoring. This list was approved by the AFSA on December 30, 2020, in compliance with the requirements of AML CFT law of Kazakhstan, and in line with the FATF recommendations 26, 27, 28. related to regulation and supervision of financial institutions and DNFPPs. The next two documents, it's a list of predicate offense related to the money laundering and terrorist financing, and list of typology reports on money laundering and terrorist financing methods. These lists can assist all AML CFT stakeholders in better understanding the nature of the existing and emerging money laundering and terrorist financing threats, and pursuing effective strategies to address those threats. The typology research reports are given from the publicly available sources of the FATF and FATF-style regional bodies. These documents are given the samples of money laundering and terrorist financing methods, trends, and explanation of measures on combating money laundering and terrorist financing, and general description of typologies and case studies. The last one, it's a AFSA notice on the requirements to the AML training courses, and recognized 7 AML training centers. On February 18, 2021, AFSA updated the AML training notice and added specifically added recognition of international certificates as ACAMS, and included a new training center into the list of recognized AML training centers. It is important to note that a relevant person for verification of its customers may use one or more of the following measures, and may develop additional measures provided they do not conflict with the AFSA AML rules and Aml Guidance and AML CFT legislation of Kazakhstan. As you can see, there are several verification measures in case of non-face-to-face CDD relevant persons may use. And these requirements or the guidance on non-face-to-face CDD should be implemented by the relevant persons in its AML policies, controls, and procedures. The next one is AML CFT supervision. In compliance with the requirements of AFSA AML rules, AML Guidance, and AML CFT law of Kazakhstan, AFSA performs the following supervision measures in the field of AML CFT. The first, it's off-site monitoring, which includes review and analysis of the relevant person's AML policies, controls, and procedures. We check the compliance level of the relevant persons and conduct a risk assessment of gaps and vulnerabilities. Also, we use gathering of annual AML returns of the relevant persons on annual basis of AML rules. And in the annual AML return, the relevant persons should demonstrate the effectiveness level of its AML system and provide statistical data, and also explain its AML CFT measures implemented in its AML policies, controls, and procedures. The next one is a risk assessment. Risk assessment includes the assessment of compliance with the AML CFT framework and evaluation of performance of requirements in the field of AML CFT. The next one is providing feedback and recommendations in case of identified high risks, gaps, and vulnerabilities in the relevant person's AML policies, controls, and procedures. We provide also control of implementation of license conditions by the relevant persons on AML matters. For example, when AFSA grants a license to a relevant person, AFSA may set out license conditions, and we control the implementation of the license conditions on AML matters. For example, if MLRO does not have an appropriate experience in the field of AML CFT, AFSA may impose to obtain AML training for the MLRO. Because the main functions of MLRO is compliance with the requirements of AML CFT framework and perform all these requirements. The next one is organizing webinars for the relevant persons in the field of AML CFT on a regular basis. We organize webinars for the relevant persons in case of, for example, amendments to the AFSA AML legislation or approval of any new documents on AML matters and any changes in the field of AML CFT. All our news and information we upload on our website, on the AFSA website. And after that, we provide webinars for relevant persons and explain in details what kind of new documents were approved or any changes or amendments. The next one is providing clarifications and consultations for the relevant persons on AML CFT matters per request. We routinely provide clarifications and consultations for the relevant persons on AML matters when we receive a request. For example, there can be a request to clarify how to implement the requirements of AML CFT rules. And of course, we always try to provide all clarifications, provide all the links to the legislation of AFSA on the AML matters. And day to day, we have different communications with our relevant persons. I mean, AFSA participants subject to the AML CFT supervision. And the second part of the AML CFT measures is the on-site inspections. The first, it's routine inspections. We conduct routine inspections in compliance with the supervision plan and schedule of inspections, which we prepare every year and make updates, amendments. And the next one, it's non-scheduled inspections. In case of high risks or violations, AFSA may organize non-scheduled inspections, and especially in case of high money laundering and terrorist financing risk rate of the relevant person, and any cases of contribution of AFSA legislation requirements. Of course, before preparing the non-scheduled inspections, we analyze the results of risk assessment. We review all the documents and profile of the relevant person, and considering all the risk level, we prepare the supervision plan and schedule the inspection. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention and participation. I pass the floor to the Mr. Christopher Stringham. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for that. Yeah, so my name is Christopher Stringham. Nice to meet you. I'm glad to be here. It looks like we have some poll questions in here, so let's get to those first. The first one is, are you familiar with WorldCheck? I hope this works technically. Please try to click on that, and we'll show the results. And while we're doing that, I can continue to introduce myself. So I manage the pre-sales team for the Refinitiv customer and third-party risk solutions proposition in EMEA. And very glad to be here today to speak to you about some current trends in the AML, CFT, CFP space. It's going to be a little bit of fun. I hope to provide you some interesting views. I'll give everybody a couple more seconds to answer this question. The reason I'm asking it is because WorldCheck is the oldest product that we have in this portfolio, and it's been around for about 20 years now. So it's okay. So about 80% say that they're familiar with WorldCheck, so that's quite good. Like I said, it's about 20 years old now, so it's been around on the market for quite a while, and it was the first database of its kind. But I don't actually really want to speak too much about products today. Today, I'm much more interested about talking about the subject matter, which I think is very, very important. I'm very proud to say that we founded a coalition to fight financial crime a couple of years ago with our partners at Europol, the Atlantic Council, World Economic Forum, and others. The coalition has expanded in the last couple of years. So I think we have about 16 members now, which I'm really, really glad to be a part of. And the goal of that coalition is to promote awareness of fighting financial crime around the world. As part of the London Stock Exchange, fighting financial crime is very, very important to our business, and it's important to our employees. And it's an area that sometimes is quite complicated, and people find it easy to forget. It's really easy to think about murders and things, which is definitely important, but financial crime can be just as devastating to people, and it's important to highlight that as well. So let's get into some trends that have been going on maybe the last 5 to 10 years, which are continuing and which I think is very, very relevant and important to be aware of. The first point I'd like to talk about is leaks in general, and maybe the Fincen file leaks in particular. So, we've seen a lot of leaks in the last 10 years, starting with Panama Papers, Paradise Papers. These types of things happen pretty regularly now. I mean, we have some of these, maybe 1 or 2 a year, where journalists get a hold of a nice, neat set of data that they can use to analyze financial crime flows, corruption, and other interesting topics. The most recent one, or one of the most recent ones, is the Fincen Files. So what happened was that some journalists, led by BuzzFeed, got a hold of a number of suspicious activity reports that were filed to the United States' FIU, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. This was a very, very interesting data set, but it caused a lot of controversy. And to be honest, it probably caused a lot of controversy. So whereas a lot of the other leaks previously had been, really showing things that really looked like illicit behavior and things that caused the resignations of prime ministers and things, the Fincen Files, these were suspicious activity reports. These were things that banks filed correctly. Banks have an obligation to identify suspicious activity, and if there is something there, to make a declaration. So the banks that were involved in the files that were leaked were actually doing everything correctly. It seemed like the journalists didn't necessarily understand always what was going on. Certainly there were a bunch of very smart people who did consult on it, but the people who were writing a lot of the news articles weren't necessarily subject matter experts. And I think it's really important to point out that banks want to be able to file suspicious activity reports without having that publicated in any form. We're talking about client relationships, personal identifiable information. But banks have to be able to rely on confidentiality, and these files being leaked could definitely have hurt that. But getting beyond that, the files were interesting for a couple other reasons. First off, it kind of showed where the weaknesses are in the current SARS system. And I think that there might have been some misinterpretations here, or at least I have my own spin on this. So the number of suspicious transaction reports or significant activity reports has really been climbing in the last few years. The FATF has really been pushing that regime, and the number of reports that are filed every year has been increasing. But it's hard to say whether or not that has actually been leading to a reduction in financial crime or an increase in assets frozen or recovered. And I don't think it's necessarily a problem with the SARS or the STRs themselves. I mean, we see from the Fincen Files that the banks that were making the reports were correctly identifying suspicious behavior, and they were correctly reporting this. The question for me is what happens after that? Are regulators and law enforcement agencies in a situation where they can actually act on that information? And due to the particularities of the Fincen Files, where it was a very limited data set, it was about specific types of transactions. 62% of all the SARs in this data file relate to one European bank. So it's not a perfectly random, perfect data set, but still, we were identifying correctly suspicious activity. And because of the international nature of financial crime, the authorities weren't able to do anything about it. The underlying crimes and the underlying money laundering activity didn't necessarily happen in the United States, and the people involved weren't in a position where the U.S. Law enforcement authorities could pursue those persons in a specific way. I think if you think about that, we really need to have to reassess how we go after these types of crimes. But, you know, I'm not disheartened in naturally. I think it's actually really positive what we saw in the Fincen Files, because the banks are actually able to identify suspicious activity, which is good. Now we have to think about what comes next. And that's where this conversation needs to go, in my opinion. Next topic, shell companies. This has been an ongoing discussion, and there has been a lot of development in this the last couple weeks, months, maybe years. But, you know, all of those money leaks that I was just talking about, they've really highlighted the use of shell companies in a variety of jurisdictions to help money laundering networks move funds around the financial system. One of the big players in this area is the United Kingdom. Almost every money laundering scandal we see has some sort of connection to the United Kingdom, particularly with shell companies. There have been some discussions of reform. The UK government has been talking about ways to reform Companies House to provide even more transparency and to provide more assurance. I mean, one of the really, really great things about Companies House is that the data is available for everybody who wants to see it. I think that's a system that's much better than the quasi-private registers that are kind of popping up everywhere else, because you get much more eyes on the problem. Journalists, one of the reasons we see so much activity and so many connections with the United Kingdom is because journalists are actually able to go into the data and look at it. So that's very, very good. And the UK, because of its position in the financial systems, is obviously exposed as well. So the new reforms to Companies House are actually going to be looking more to verify the data. Companies House will actually have the mandate to be able to double check whether or not the information that's being declared is valid or plausible. So that's quite good. In the United States, we also see development on this. Legislation was just passed to create an ultimate beneficial owner register in the United States. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a transparency register along the lines of the UK Companies House, but still, it's a step in the right direction. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to have, you know, as in most European countries and the United States, to have a UBO register, which is quasi-private at the beginning, or at least it's restricted to the obligated entities like banks and other financial institutions. And then once you have it up and running, then you expand it to a broader audience. But we shouldn't forget that step. We should definitely make it easier for the public and journalists and data providers to have access to the data. All right, virtual assets. This is a fun one. Cryptocurrency is very, very interesting. Bitcoin, from a technological point of view, is very exciting, I think, but it hasn't quite got mainstream in the financial markets. Its use in money laundering schemes and financial crime schemes has been limited because of this. I mean, if I take dollars, if I take a stack of cash, I can basically find anywhere in the world who will exchange my dollars, my physical dollars, for something that I might want. And that's not necessarily the case with virtual assets. But we do see a secular pattern as the price of Bitcoin increases. Its attractiveness to criminals increases as well. We also see, as some gangster said in the 1930s, why do you rob banks? Well, because that's where the money is. Well, Bitcoin's the same way. When you have a lot of money in the Bitcoin system, then it becomes more attractive to thefts. So a lot of the money that we see, or a lot of the Bitcoins that we see connected to financial crime, are stolen coins. One of the big challenges here, and I think one of the actual limitations for Bitcoin going really into the mainstream, is that a large number of the virtual asset service providers around the world don't actually apply high quality, know your customer standards like financial institutions would expect. So mainstream financial institutions are very hesitant to deal with virtual asset service providers because of that. You have a black box effect. If I'm a bank dealing with a virtual asset service provider, I'm doing transactions for them, but I have no idea what they're doing on on their systems and in their house. So virtual assets are interesting. The price, as you can see, has increased dramatically in the last couple of weeks. I think we're right around $50,000 per Bitcoin. So that definitely makes it attractive for financial criminals and for money launderers. We'll see if the price comes down. We'll see if the service providers in this space start applying more and better anti-financial crime procedures and KFC procedures. But it's definitely a place to watch. All right, now, so one of the biggest topics for the day is gold. Gold is a lot of fun. You know, everybody says Bitcoin is sort of like a virtual gold. Well, it's not actually as good as gold. Money launderers prefer gold. Gold is amazing. Gold is valuable. It is portable, and it's largely untraceable. I mean, if I have a Bitcoin, I can follow the blockchain back to you know, every step in every transaction that was related to it. Gold, you can't do that. You know, if somebody catches me on the street and sees that I have a bag of gold, and yeah, it could look suspicious, but actually proving where I got that from and everything could be very, very challenging. What's also very interesting is that gold is not inherently illegal. So drug cartels around the world, particularly in South America, are really moving towards gold. Apparently, gold has become more valuable to the drug cartels than drug trafficking itself. And it's partly because, one, the price of gold has increased dramatically in the last couple of years. As you can see in the chart, we have significant increases in the price of gold. And that's very useful for money laundering purposes. So the more valuable gold is, the less of it you need to move value around. And even beyond just pure money laundering activities, gold is valuable to drug cartels directly. So quite often they've gotten involved in illegal mining activities in South America and other places where they can, you know, directly access the gold, sell it on the markets. It's very hard to prove if it came from an illegal mining operation or not. And since it's an illegal mining operation, they don't have to follow the normal environmental laws and health and safety laws. So it's much more profitable for drug cartels to operate than it is for a legitimate business. Now, we're seeing gold pop up in numerous financial crime schemes in the last couple of years. There was a case about 9 years ago, 10 years ago now, was relating to Iranian sanctions, where some banks in the region, or one bank in particular, was exploiting a loophole in Iranian sanctions to convert Iranian cash into gold and export that gold to Iran. So that, you know, as a way of avoiding the sanctions regimes that were imposed by both the U.S. and the European Union at the time. Now, once those loopholes were closed, we can see in this chart that the exports from the country where the bank was located directly to Iran dropped very, very quickly. And we see that the gold was routed over the United Arab Emirates as the exports to the UAE jumped up very, very quickly. Now, the UAE, under pressure from European and American authorities, they put the brakes on that quite quickly, but not completely. So it was able to be very profitable for the Iranian government to evade those international sanctions. And we've seen this type of activity in a bunch of other places. This specific case has been ongoing for quite a while. As in all cases, sanctions related, there's a lot of political influence being exerted on these type of activities and in enforcement activities. Some of the participants went to jail, not all of them. It's an ongoing topic, but it provides a really nice, useful explanation about how gold can be used to evade the normal financial systems. We have a couple other gold-related cases. There was recently a case identified by journalists at the BBC and other places, which discovered that drug gangs in Europe were using the proceeds of drug crimes to purchase gold in Europe and then transfer that to the UAE and other places which have gold trading industries. where then it was cashed in, the cash was taken then to money transfer bureaus and then transferred back to people. And so you had multiple chain breaks in the chain, in the electronic transactions. First was gold, and then into cash, and then back into electronic currency to be moved around. That makes following the money laundering scheme very, very difficult. You can't trace the money back very easily. But what was really interesting in this case is that the gold exports, they were actually disguised to look like silver to avoid various stuff related to gold exports. And there were some issues with the Big Four consultants who were doing auditing for some of the big companies involved. Apparently, the auditors realized that there was something dubious going on here, but there was pressure by management at that Big Four consultancy to avoid mention of that in the audit reports. Which again shows the importance of external auditors and external providers of assurance to legitimizing business or making illegal business look legitimate. Another case here, there was a Havala organization in Germany. Havala is completely illegal in Germany, but they were moving money from Germany to Turkey that was originating from illegal businesses, but they were moving so much one way that they had to come up with an alternative method of getting the money back to Germany. So what they were actually doing is buying gold and selling that gold then to a Turkish gold or metals processing company who was then using internal, company internal wire transfers to move the money around. It's a very interesting scheme. More gold, why not? Gold in the end works similarly to trade-based money laundering. So you can take illegally sourced gold, either sourced through illegal mining activities or purchased with illegal funds. You can then sell that to a broker or a shell company that's set up to look like a metals broker. They then trade with a gold refinery, and that gold refinery will then deposit money on whoever's bank account you want. From the bank perspective, this is very challenging because you see a bank transaction from a legitimate and possibly reputable gold refinery or gold dealer. But behind that, you have a lot of movement going on. Which brings us then to trade-based money laundering, which is also an area where we've seen a lot of developments in some of the recent money laundering scandals and leaks, such as the Danske Bank money laundering scandal. We saw evidence of trade-based money laundering. So basically what you would have is you have possibly illegal financial flows from Eastern Europe and the Confederation of Independent States to shell companies set up in Europe, in Moldova or Estonia or other places. That money would then be moved around to other shell companies, possibly in the Caribbean, like Belize or even New Zealand. And then to get money back, because, it's nice to move your money out of country for safekeeping, but eventually, you want money back wherever you are so that you can do things where you're actually living. What they were doing is these shell companies were purchasing industrial goods, chemical goods from German companies and other European companies to transfer goods back to the countries of origin for the illicit funds, and that could then be identified as consumer goods on the invoices or on the transportation documentation. And then once it gets back to country origin, it can be sold. And if anybody asks, well, I operate an import-export business. I import chemical goods from German companies and I sell them here. That's my business. And suddenly the money that you have on your bank account looks legitimate. This is very difficult for banks to identify, but we really actually need more help from the manufacturing companies to look for this type of behavior where you have one company ordering the goods, another company paying for the goods, and a third company taking delivery of the goods. I think that a transaction like that should be raising people's eyebrows a little bit. I think is actually one of my last points here on this. trade-based money laundering or something like that doesn't actually have to have physical transportation of goods. You can have basically trades. So something that we've seen is, you have three participants in an illicit transaction who want different things. So say you have a drug user in country A, they have dollars and they want drugs. Well, there are drug cartels who want dollars, have drugs, but they also need other things. So chemical precursors to create the drugs. And how do they then get those chemical precursors? And where are they coming from? Well, they're coming from country C, with a large chemical industry. They want dollars. They want to move value out of their home country, and they're willing to exchange that for the chemical precursors. And so we have a three-way trade going along. And actually, at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, drug cartels in America, particularly because that's where a lot of money is being generated, they were actually having trouble laundering all of their money. Because if you look at where the people or the businesses or the factories involved in this trade are, that was an area that was hit really, really hard at the beginning of the crisis. And all of those factories making the chemical precursors shut down for months. So this trade fell apart, and police in Los Angeles were discovering apartments and flats full of cash because the drug cartels just basically had to sit on it until the trade picked back up again, which is very interesting. And so the final point for me is that there are also actually changes at the FATF level as well. Recently, in October 2020, the Financial Action Task Force adopted amendments to some of their recommendations to increase the prominence of countering the financing of proliferation. So now governments and financial institutions have obligations to do risk assessments for money laundering, for terrorist financing, and financing of proliferation, which I think is very, very good. We don't want weapons proliferation to be easy. We want to reinforce the various United Nations, there are definitely frameworks in place at the moment to help deal with that, such as the United Nations sanctions relating to proliferation financing. But we want to reinforce that. We want to do a little bit more in that area because it is such an important topic. I'm not 100% satisfied actually with the FATF changes in this area. I think it's a little bit unclear what's necessarily required that's new. I think we have to do a little bit more work on that, but I'm very happy, and I think it's very important that this has been brought back on the table as a point of discussion, that it has been reinforced how important of a topic that this is. I think that's very, very positive, and I think we also should try to broaden it even further to discuss more about the proliferation of conventional weapons and not just weapons of mass destruction. Sure, that there's a lot of overlap there with terrorism financing, but terrorists aren't the only ones trying to get their hands on conventional weaponry, and conventional weapons can do just as much damage as weapons of mass destruction in some cases. Let's be honest, a lot of terrorists are going really low tech and using rental cars to cause damage. So you don't need a lot of money in this area, but we should definitely do our best to make sure that it's as hard as possible for the bad actors to get their hands on weaponry, both conventional and WMDs that can make their lives easier. We don't want that. So those are some of the trends that I've been seeing over the last couple of years. There's obviously much more to talk about in a lot of variety of different areas, but these are the ones which I think should definitely be hot topics of discussion in our anti-financial crime community. Those are areas where we're definitely seeing criminals engaged in activity, and thankfully we're also seeing regulators engaging in action to combat that. And overall, that's a very, very positive trend as well, which is good. But anyway, that's it for me. I hope that this was interesting. Feel free to reach out to me afterwards and if you ever want to have any discussions. I think that my contact details will be provided after this webinar is over, but you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can talk to the local Refinitiv team and they'll put you in touch with me. I'm looking forward to having a conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Christopher. Dear audience, first of all, I would like to thank our speakers and to add a little note to the description of this webinar and the general idea. We wanted to make this very first event pretty dedicated to the framework, and at the same time to show the expertise of a business, I mean the separate entity which operates in this sphere. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask us and our speakers. I think we have some. Yeah, the first one is from Edward Yarovoy to Christopher. Hi, Christopher. Thanks for the great speech. It was a great pleasure to hear you. It's actually not a question. But anyway, thank you, Edward. I think Christopher also appreciates. Yeah, there's a gratitude notes.
I mean, I think we do have some time for some questions, so feel free to drop something in there if there was any point you'd like me to discuss further.
Yeah, don't be shy. We're pretty good on timing, and we have some time left for the Q&A session. All right, I think these topics are just too big to discuss it in details in a single session, so I would better provide some special answers to your questions via our contact information, which you can find. I guess something's left over here from me. Yeah, we invite you to our community of financial markets information data. Financial markets data community, and the compliance service, which was already presented. Actually, not really presented, but I think mentioned by Christopher in the very beginning of his speech. I think we have 3 questions. Just a second. Yeah, we have some questions. Let me just finish this clause. The wall check, that's the compliance service. In my opinion, it's the best in class one. And as you can see, there are my contact information, which you can, by which you can reach me out. So yeah, let's stay in touch. But before we end this session, I think a couple more questions. First is by Jan Tkachev. Wanted to know how should we arrange internal trainings? Well, dear Jan, may I ask you to a little bit detailize to clarify this question so that we can provide you a definite answer.
Yeah, there is a question for me about Bitcoin. Should I take that now?
Yeah, I can respond. I understood this question. It is related to the internal trainings required by the AML rules, as I understood. Of course, money laundering reporting officer should provide internal AML trainings for the employees of the relevant person on annual basis regularly. But in case of hiring new employees, the schedule depends on how the relevant person is scheduled. And for example, we recommend to provide internal AML trainings for employees on annual basis. Thank you.
Well, thank you a lot. And one last. Yeah, we have one more from Kanat, which was already answered by Christopher. You don't leave me some space to read through these questions. One last, Alexander Polubotko. Hi, Christopher. Could you please share with us your prognosis for Bitcoin and its future? Yeah, just a couple words about Bitcoin, Chris.
Yeah, so like I said, Bitcoin has a very, very interesting technology. I mean, so the challenge with all electronic currencies really is how do you know that they're not spent more than once? And Bitcoin just has a brilliant solution to that with its open ledger. I mean, everybody knows it hasn't been spent more than once because everybody can see what's been happening. So I think that's quite just ingenious. It's simple, but it solves that problem. Now, Bitcoin in general is, for me, however, a solution where the problem hasn't actually been identified yet. So what do I mean by that? I mean, I live in Austria. I get paid in euros, and everything I do is in euros. So I don't need Bitcoin because I have something that already meets my needs. Now, sure, theoretically, Bitcoin can be used to transfer money internationally. Some people need that, but banks are already doing that as well. So, you know, Bitcoin has a bit of a community behind it where you have a lot of people who think, you know, we have to break free from government control and be independent and stuff. And I don't think the majority of people care about that. I think people say, you know, is the financial system providing, you know, helping me transfer the money I need to transfer in a useful and convenient way? And I think generally banks are pretty good at that. Now, obviously, the price of Bitcoin is climbing. More people are getting involved. So maybe my opinions here are just completely wrong. Maybe I am the exception to the rule here, and people really see Bitcoin as a place where they want to invest money and something they want to use to transfer money. Elon Musk is definitely fully backing Bitcoin, and apparently you'll be able to buy a Tesla with Bitcoin in the future, which is, I guess, interesting. It's fine. I don't think I'll ever do it. But, you know, if some people want to, I guess why not? I think the challenges with Bitcoin, though, are one, energy usage is very high. It's expensive to run the Bitcoin network. I think the recent thing I heard is that the Bitcoin network uses more electricity than like New Zealand or something. Don't know if that's true, but, you know, it sounds like it could theoretically be possible. And, you know, that's a lot of energy. Secondly, like I said, the network or the virtual asset service providers aren't as sophisticated yet when it comes to anti-financial crime processes. We still see thefts of Bitcoin wallets, you know, hacks and exchanges being broken into. Because of the lack of KYC procedures at a significant portion of WASPs, it's a dangerous area for banks to be involved in. I see there's another question about what type of support do we provide regarding digital assets. Yeah, so it's kind of a complicated question. One of the things that we do is that if a Bitcoin wallet or a crypto wallet is identified by official agencies around the world as being high risk or something that you should block or something, say it's on a sanctions list, OFAC is putting Bitcoin wallet addresses on the OFAC sanctions list, but we can help you keep track of that. And we also work with a number of partners in this space. So yeah, I mean, we do work with virtual asset service providers. Our partners work with these entities. So it's something we can definitely talk about more if you are interested in that. Yeah. So yeah, if you're interested in that, just reach out to us and we'll set something up.
Yeah, there was one more about the digital assets and the cryptos. A Tursunov asked, are you planning to implement any solutions in Refinitiv products for tracking AML with cryptos? If yes, when we can expect it?
Yeah, I mean, we have some solutions already. We're working on some more. It's something that we should probably set up a meeting to talk about in more detail about what your requirements are. Yeah, hope that helps.
Okay. Amazing. All right, dear audience, thank you for joining our webinar. Please be informed that we are going to allocate all the presentations and webinar materials in just a couple, several days. So yes, thank you to our partner. Thank you for our speakers. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Dolat, Irkegali, and Yelena. So yeah, let's stay in touch. You can see my contacts here. You can reach me out in social networks. Yes, have a good evening, and see you next time.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.